Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Local with Kim. My name is Kim M. Clark and I'm a Realtor with Caldwell Banker. And today I have the opportunity to interview Emily Baker, who is a local author in Tarpon Springs and the author of Nel Adora and the Swamp Witch. And wait till we hear about this book today because it is the most adorable book I've read in a long time. But let's hear from Emily, shall we? Emily, welcome to today's show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim. I really appreciate being here.
So tell us, what is Nel Adora and the Swamp Witch all about?
It's a book about a little girl who is having a tough time connecting with her family. There's a lot of them in this house. She's got brothers and sisters and pets, and it's just kind of a crazy place to be. So she wanders off looking for a little bit of peace and stumbles into the Swamp Witch's domain. Now, her brother has told her terrible stories about the Swamp Witch, so she's a little bit scared about what to expect here, but finds out that things aren't quite as bad as they might seem. So she gets a little bit of advice, makes a new friend, and ends up improving her life a little bit along the way. And it rhymes. It's awesome. Took a little bit of time to get it down, but it was good. And, a little bit of magic to the story.
You know, I loved how the story did rhyme. It had that Dr. Seuss vibe going on. It was just so lighthearted and fun and friendly to read.
That is the best compliment I could have wished for. I love Dr. Seuss. I love rhyming, Shel Silverstein. All of that kind of just energy always spoke to me as a child. And I've tried to write, adult long form novels and things like that. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, my brain just thinks in rhymes.
Yeah, there's a certain energy that you get with rhymes. And then you memorize things better that way as well. It helps with learning.
That's what I think. It's going to be easier for the kids to connect to the story, to remember the story, and to recall some of the important messaging that's there inside of it.
So what age group did you write the story for?
Originally, the age group that it's intended for is 9 to 13, and that would be kind of a read-alone age. Mm-hmm. But it's good for any age group. I have had multiple adults tell me that it's one of the first books that they've sat and read cover to cover in a long time because it's a short story and it's got a good message and it's enjoyable to read. And I've had people who've read it to their children in much younger ages, kindergarten to birth, So really any age. I got a picture actually that one lady sent me that was of her little granddaughter had fallen asleep with the book beside her, and it was the most precious thing I had ever seen. So it just brightened my day and really made it for me.
What inspired you to write this story?
I was sitting in a chair in my house, just looking out at the river and out at the swamp marsh area, and it just came to me, and I grabbed a piece of paper and I started writing. And before I knew it, I had a story. Mm-hmm. So it started kind of in the middle, is where it began.
A story in the middle.
Yeah. So it started in the middle, and I wrote the middle part first, and then I was like, okay, this is not a story. This is a speech. So then I went back and added in the beginning, added in the end, and then about 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, I jolted awake and realized that the end was wrong. So then I rewrote the end.
Okay, well, you're entitled to do that. It's your story after all.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Is Nel Adora, is she based upon anyone you know in real life?
She is not necessarily based on anyone specifically, but is more a combination of all of the little girls that I have known throughout my life. I used to work with the 4-H organization when I lived in Kentucky, mm-hmm. and there were just a lot of little kids there that I connected with that I love and miss so much. And there are things that I wanted to tell them and a message that I wanted to give them, and finding the right vehicle to deliver that in a way that was meaningful to them was a bit of a challenge. So I've done different little iterations of books throughout the years, none that were ever published or anything like that, just in my Word documents at home. And it took me a while to really land on something, and then that day it just hit me and it all kind of came together.
Okay, well, we know I asked about Nel Adora. How about the Swamp Witch?
No, this
I want to know.
The Swamp Witch is not necessarily based off of anyone either. However, there have been lots of strong women in my life that have made me feel very special and very loved and provided that friendship to me that was unexpected. And that it felt a little magical in the way that they live their life and the way that they present themselves. And they've been very special to me, and I appreciate that. Now, I will tell you that after I wrote the book, I was in here working one day. We're in Architectural Salvage Bank. So I was in working, and this lady walked in, and it took my breath away. I stopped and I go, "You're the Swamp Witch!" She looked exactly like her, and she looked at me, kind of gave me a funny look, you know. I said, no, don't be offended. I'm like, she's beautiful. I was like, but you look exactly like her. So that was kind of an odd moment for me. It just kind of stuck in my mind that she did. She just looked exactly like her. So it was like she was meant to come in, you know.
Oh, that's a very endearing story and everything. So in what ways has the process of writing this book and having it published, what have you learned from this whole experience?
I have learned a lot. It was a very interesting process. One of the coolest parts was finding an illustrator to work with, because what I learned is that I am not any good at drawing pictures, and and though there are people close to me who are very talented, they don't have the time necessarily. So working with a stranger, working with someone outside of my normal people group, worked really well for the process. So I used a service called Readsy, and it is a writer's resource online, and it helps you find editors, illustrators, all sorts of publishers, whatever you're looking for. But I used that for the illustrator, and I wrote up just a little synopsis of what my book was about and posted that on there, and then invited several different people to bid on that. And the guy I ended up going with, his name is Josh Tufts. He's out of Columbus, Ohio, and he's incredibly talented. He was actually my first choice, so I was so glad when I got an affordable bid from him. And we went through the process. It took about 6 months from beginning to end of working through. He sent me different little illustrations along the way. We started with defining what the Swamp Witch and what Nel Adora was going to look like. So I got like a sheet of like 6 different samples of possible Swamp Witches. You know, some were short and fat, and some were really tall and thin, and just we worked through that process, and it was just really interesting. I had published a couple of books before through the process, not of my own. So I kind of had a good idea of how that side of things was going to work, but the working with the illustrator and getting it all put together as a book was really, really exciting, and something that people should not be afraid of doing. So if you have a story and you want to tell it, it's easier than you think.
Oh, what advice would you give to anyone thinking about writing a book?
Pretty much just exactly that. Go ahead and do it. Write it down. There are lots of resources online who can help you. There are Facebook groups that are author groups that range from people who are just getting started to people who are selling their books to people who are on their 10th book to people who want to start a Kickstarter to help them kick off their book. There's a lot of great resources there. There are a lot of great services that can help you find people. And I mean, there's a lot of audience now too, with everyone is so connected. So get out there, get your story together, work with an editor who can give you great advice. I had an awesome editor. Her name is Ann Jacob, and she's with Poppin' Edits, and she went through and reviewed my story. I had a misspelling, but she found, I know, praise the Lord. So she found my misspelling, and she gave me some really good advice on rhythm of the story, the timing of my rhymes, and rewrote a couple of little pieces to just kind of help me smooth it out a bit. So she was a true blessing to me as well. So work with someone who knows what they're doing, find good people that you trust, and go for it.
And I believe there's a willing community out there to help.
Definitely.
In that regard.
Oh yeah, there are tons of people who will be more than happy to help you, often for very little charge, if any. I know that I have reviewed other people's books and given advice just from author to author because I want there to be more books. You know, I love books, and I want people to be telling their stories and putting things out there that, because it's going to be gone one day. You know, if we don't tell the stories now, the story that's within you only lies within you, and if you don't tell it, when you're gone, your story is gone. So we need to protect these. We need to preserve these and share them with the next generation.
Well, so are there any other books that are in the monthly writing stage at the moment? What else can we expect from Emily Baker?
I have several other things in mind. I'm thinking of one that would be next in the Nel Adora series would be about a time when the spell doesn't work. There's a little spell that the Swamp Witch teaches her to help her get through. And I want to write about a time when that spell doesn't go as it has up to that point or as promised. So that's kind of what I've got in mind for there. And then just lots of other things. My brain's always writing little stories. Usually it writes little snippet poems about different silly people, stuff like that.
Silly people.
The world's full of them.
So before we end this conversation, would it be an imposition if I were to ask you to read a little bit about Nel Adora and the Swamp Witch for our community so they can get a sample? Well, yes.
I happen to have a copy right here.
Very.
Oh gosh. So this is Nel Adora and the Swamp Witch, and this is my book. So I suppose we'll start at the beginning, even though I started in the middle. It'll make more sense.
Yes.
So Nel Adora lived in what seemed like a zoo with her brothers and sisters and a cousin or two. 11 young children filled their big house, along with cats, dogs, and turtles, even a mouse. She longed for attention she rarely could get. Her father worked hard from sunrise to sunset. He said, "Hush now, I'm busy. I've no time to talk." So, sad and lonely, she took a long walk. Into the woods where the trees grew tall was the only place she could ever find peace at all. This day she walked further than ever before, and at the edge of a swamp, she saw a strange door. Covered in moss and carved into a tree, it didn't belong to any house she could see. She stood there in wonder, confused by the sight. She stood there so long that day turned to night. She'd never been out this late all alone and wasn't quite sure how to find her way home. So she sat on a rock and thought for a while, and she told herself jokes to make herself smile. The night was so calm and so clear and so bright when suddenly she saw the spookiest sight. The wooden door opened, her breath caught in a hitch, for there before her stood the dreaded Swamp Witch. "She eats kids for breakfast," her brother Tommy had said. "She's big, like a giant, with snakes on her head. And if you ever find her, you'd better run right away. The last kid who saw her is still gone to this day." "Who's out there?" screeched a curious voice, and Nel Adora was faced with a terrible choice. Should she run? Should she scream? Perhaps she should hide. She had only a moment in which to decide. She was lost, so there was only one thing to do. Bravely, she said, "I'm Nell. Who are you?" The Swamp Witch laughed and said with a grin, "It's quite late, little Nell. Why don't you come in?" "I know who you are," said Nell, full of fear. "There's only one person who would ever live here. You're the Swamp Witch. You'll eat me. I know that it's true." "Very well, little Nell. Then I'll come to you." She closed the door and came into the night, and poor little Nell worried her fears had been right. Oh, why had she wandered so far all alone? It seemed now she would never find her way home. What's going to happen next? You'll have to get the book and see.
So there we have it. Yes, I recommend them. Where can they find your book?
You can get it on Amazon.
Okay.
So it's available there. If you would like a signed copy, there are several places in town here in Tarpon that sell them. You can get them here at Architectural Salvage Bank. You can get them at the Healing Head Witch down on Tarpon Ave. Or you can get them on the Sponge Docks at Missy Bells and Whistles. And we're hoping to add more stores soon. So you can follow us on Facebook, Nel Adora and the Swamp Witch, and we'll be posting where they're available there and any other exciting news that we have.
Well, thank you, Emily. This wraps up our interview today, and I want everybody to go out and find someone you can buy that book for because it's worth every single penny. And thank you for joining Let's Keeping It Local with Kim, and looking forward to our next interview.